Hello and welcome. Good day, everybody. Uh, Welcome to CTO Life Line, episode number 4. This is the live stream that helps CTOs move from just surviving to thriving. And today's topic, are organizations fit for humans? And to help me talk about that, as usual, my co-host, Noah Cantor. Tell the audience about yourself, Noah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Noah, tech leadership coach. I've got more than 20 years of experience in and around technology in organizations of all sizes across multiple different industries and all areas of technology, from kind of front end to back end DevOps leadership. And I work with people all over the world as a coach, a CTO, and a consultant.
And I'm Daniel Walters. I'm the ex-CTO and CIO of Seek Asia, CPTO for Weirdly, local startup in New Zealand, and currently a CTO coach and principal consultant. Now today we have the first of what will be many guests. So that's an update to our format. So I would very much like to welcome our special guest. So, yes, he's on the stage. So this is Matthew Skelton, co-author of Team Topologies and CEO and founder, and soon to have some other brilliant title for Conflux. So welcome to the show, Matthew.
Thanks, Daniel. It's good to be here. Hi, everyone. It's still actually Wednesday, my time. You already can see Thursday. I hope it's good in New Zealand. You get it all first, right?
Yep, it's all right so far.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Sun shining in my window, so here in Auckland, it's feeling pretty great. So Noah, we have some housekeeping. Do you want to take us through some of that before we move on?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So the first one is we will answer questions as we go. Please drop them in the comments and we'll address them when they come up. There will be a recording hosted on LinkedIn after this, be available for viewing afterwards. And we, as Daniel said, are updating the format that we're using, and we've lined up a handful of guests already. Our next guest will be with us on July 17th at 7 p.m. New Zealand time, 8 p.m. British Summer Time, or 8 a.m. Sorry,
8 a.m.
British Summer Time. And we'll be speaking with Adelina Chalmers. So, and today,
yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Today, we are going to be talking about are organizations fit for humans? And we came across this topic after several conversations, one with Matthew and several with some other people that we're connected with, and thought it was important enough to bring it up here. And for me, it's a really interesting topic, and it's something I think I could talk about all day. And the reason for that is that we're shown, not necessarily by words, but by actions, that lots of the organizations out in the world, particularly as they get bigger, believe that being humane and running a successful organization are orthogonal. That is, they occasionally connect, but they're mostly independent. And when I talk about organizations, I don't mean the organization itself has a set of beliefs. I mean that the collective set of assumptions and behaviors of the people that run the organizations act in particular ways. So it's a shortcut. But ultimately, we tend to see organizations in the position that business always has to win. Most recently, we've seen it in layoffs, which have gone around the world, and lots of them are reported as we saw other tech companies doing layoffs, and so we figured we had to do the same, as a really kind of blatant example. But it also shows up in things like long hours culture, minimizing holiday availability, managing people out of organizations, and maximizing resource utilization. So calling people resources and then thinking of them as interchangeable bits leads to some of these behaviors. And it's got massive negative psychological impact on people, whether the people being treated as resources or the people subconsciously dehumanizing others. And so I've been talking about imposter syndrome a lot recently. And the more I learn about it and the more I look at this problem, the two seem to be connected. Daniel, what do you think about it?
Well, just to add to the list, whilst we're listing out things, so performance management is one that jumps out at me, which, a good example of something that's orthogonal. There's also creating scenarios where there's a lot of unnecessary politics, and that might be through, different groups of people having less context or less feedback, or being artificially set up to be in competition with each other. So there's all sorts of perverse incentives and other challenges that come up. What about you, Matthew?
I agree. There's people almost expect work to be joyless in many cases. They expect it to be like some kind of we're just taking orders from other people, and just like our job is just to kind of execute something in a very small way. A lot of this kind of mentality in organizations comes from Taylorism from the early 1920s, when there was this push to kind of somehow make factories more efficient, and we're splitting people into groups of managers and workers. The managers do the thinking, the workers do the doing. I mean, it's very class-based. Well, I'm in the UK. Like a lot of these kind of problems came out of the UK in terms of the Industrial Revolution, right? So I'll hold up my hand if you like. I don't personally introduce Taylorism anywhere, definitely not. But a lot of that stuff came from the factories of the UK and then spread to other parts of the world. And that approach basically never really worked anyway, because the idea that humans are just there to do work and not have any input into the say of how things actually operate is deeply ineffective, because the humans on the front line are the ones who can see where the changes can be improved, even inside a very physical work environment like a factory. But it's certainly a mental model which effectively works against a lot of the modern working environments, many of which have a high degree of knowledge work, where we're expecting people to think, or ideally we get people to think and work together to improve things. And this idea that there's a bunch of people who've done all the thinking and you just need to execute and do it. It doesn't even produce good business results. This is the point. It's not even just on the bottom line, even just in terms of dollars or whatever it is, currency, that it doesn't even produce good results for that. So it begs the question, why do organizations feel compelled to operate like that?
So I'm going to bring a little bit of nuance into this discussion, because I think we're quite accurately describing the central part of the normal distribution of companies, right? And what we see. I know that Noah, you've shared some experiences that were really positive in some organizations you've worked in. I've been fortunate to work in a number of organizations that I think are in a different part to the spectrum, and I think we're quite aware of some of the challenges that we've been describing. So I'm going to be the guy that's saying, hey, it's not all bad. There's some really good examples out there, it takes work, and it takes what I call gardening to keep them in that great shape. So yeah,
and it's hard to do, right? And it's because it's hard to do. It's for a lot of people in a lot of organizations, it's easier not to do. It's easier to do something else that requires less effort. And I think that probably plays a part in it, is that being really effective, being caring can get you hurt. And
Mhm.
and a lot of people end up shy when that happens. They go in, they try and do a great job, they care about people a lot, and then they end up on the wrong side of a decision, and it makes them gun shy the next time it happens. And so they're less likely to kind of be as vulnerable in their next organization or their next role.
Mm. So if we were to paint a picture of what some of these more humane organizations might look like, what are some of the traits that we might see?
So when I was thinking about writing or co-authoring the Team Topologies book, it's, for those of you on the live stream, it's the one that looks like this. It's like green and orange and purple, and it's like pretty brightly coloured. Lots. It's quite recognisable. Anyway, at the heart of the Team Topologies stuff, a lot of it is actually about care for humans, because what we saw, Manuel and I, we were working together in various organizations, like from about 2016 through to 2018 is when we were working together in various places. And we saw people who were kind of floundering. They didn't know what they should be doing. They didn't know, there wasn't a sense of purpose, a sense of mission. But also, if they were asked to work together with another team or another area, like, was that a good working together collaboration, or was it less effective? There was no way to navigate kind of what it feels like to work on a daily basis. Now, our focus was in the kind of software, building and running software, kind of DevOps and software delivery and things. So the examples in the book are very much focused on that kind of area. We've since realized that the ideas in the Team Topologies book can actually be applied well outside of that, and people are applying it to recruitment and HR. They're applying it to healthcare, managing doctors' practices in the UK, applying it to legal services like a legal firm, and so on. So it seems to be knowledge work, basically. We've got people doing knowledge work in teams and like thinking, okay, this particular problem feels really gnarly. Maybe we should be working together with that other team. Okay, well, let's try it. But like, if you work together in a particular way too long with another team, it can feel really overwhelming, because maybe the domain or the knowledge discipline is very different, and it can be kind of increase a kind of cognitive element to what you're doing, and so on and so on. And personalities get in the way, and a whole bunch of stuff like this. So one of the things we deliberately tried to do with the ideas in the Team Topologies book was to provide some language and ways for people to navigate this stuff and listen to their emotions, to tell them, like, does this feel like a useful interaction? Should we be working? Should it feel like this with this other team that we're working with? And really trying to get people to sort of listen to their emotional response to their work situation and use that to the organization's advantage, saying, well, actually, we're expecting to effectively consume this thing as a service, whatever it might be. But actually, we're having to interact and collaborate and talk to this other team who's supposed to be providing. We're having to do this all the time. It doesn't feel like a service, really. It feels like it's not very well defined. Fine. So that's kind of annoying. It's kind of emotionally maybe slightly distressing, but let's use that as a signal to try and get out of that situation or to make it better. That's very much, we didn't actually talk about it in those terms in the book, but we've done a bit of a retrospective recently because it's nearly 5 years since the book was published, and we're like, yeah, this was at the heart of it. That kind of sense of trying to make things more humane is really was really there, and it's because we witnessed people kind of floundering, not having any language and a mental model to think about how work feels. So that's definitely part of it from my experience, and part of the response was to put together certain specific things and language and terminology and diagrams and things in the Team Topologies book.
When the book came along, we were partway through bringing two companies together, so that can be challenging in its own right, because think of things can be inhumane within one company. Imagining two companies that don't want to be together coming together, that's a next level. And so we were a couple of years in, and we had been testing and learning and listening and really trying to do both things that were good for the business and things that were good for the people, and having a certain amount of failure and a certain amount of success. But the book really resonated to our leadership team and also people within the teams that we were working with, because it, as you said, put some language on things that some of it we'd already arrived at, and some of it we were still discovering. But we didn't have great ways to articulate it. And so I really feel like the book did a great job of articulating things that were happening, not just within our company, but across companies globally that were grappling with the same challenges. So I'm going to bring us into our next key question then, now that we've sort of mapped the territory. What are the causes of inhumane work environments and behaviors? What are some of our theories or our observations about how these situations come about?
So one of the more interesting and perhaps unexpected ones is the tendency to focus on activity, the tendency to keep people busy, because the thinking goes, we pay somebody a salary and we should get the maximum value from that salary that we can. And the way that we do that is that we keep them busy all the time. And that's largely inherited from manufacturing and kind of traditional assembly line manufacturing behavior, where you have a huge outlay for a piece of machinery. And the way that you deal with that is you drive unit costs down by making as many units as you possibly can with that piece of machinery. And that thinking has been transferred wholesale from machinery to humans. And it creates this expectation that people will always have something to do and will always be busy and will always be running around. And that's a measure of both their worth and their value to the organization. And I think that transfer from machinery to human has a lot to answer for.
And you get this crazy situation where organizations are measuring the productivity of, let's say, software people, software engineers, whatever, by the number of lines of code that they type. I mean, that is just madness, absolute madness. And there was even a big report that came out from one big analyst firm or one organization recently that was basically advocating exactly that, or something very close to that, as a useful measure of productivity. And it's the very last thing we should be doing. Like, we don't need more code. We need code that actually delivers, that meets user needs. And that might be quite a small amount of code. But the idea, and it comes from the same place. We can measure it. We can measure how many lines of code a particular developer is creating. Great. Okay. Well, just because you can measure it doesn't actually mean that that's going to be the useful thing.
Our biggest celebrations were when we deleted code that actually added functionality. So, so a focus on busyness and activity. I mean, even the best producing sort of producers of the industrial age got beyond that thinking, and brought both humanity, slack time, all sorts of concepts that are still influential today. So sometimes it's even just the idea of assuming this is how it's done over there, and then applying these bad assumptions into organizations. So what other influences could be leading to this? I'm going to put one out there. Cost center accounting has a lot to answer for.
I definitely agree with that. And it's actually the two things are related, right? It's the notion that there's a cost to everything and we don't necessarily appreciate its value. And we struggle to connect work that's delivered with the value that it creates. And it's easy to measure the cost of someone's time or the cost of people or the cost of office space. And so we're tempted to always measure those things. And it makes it works in parallel with that unit cost mentality around people, right? That just ends up dehumanizing, I think, largely inadvertently. I don't think anyone's intentionally, well, there are probably some people doing it, but I don't think most people are intentionally dehumanizing people. It's just a side effect of the way that we tend to count numbers, the way that we account for time, the way that we account for actual resources.
And is it baked into the software tools and things that most businesses use to run things. So the HR or people management tools, typically speaking, they've got the concept of an individual, employee, staff member, but they don't have concept of teams. And so they don't have, it's just not, there's no way to represent it in most of these tools, not properly in terms of like a team-centric way of working or team-centric approach to value. Is there inside kind of ticketing tools like Jira and other things. There's no way to represent a team. It's just an individual and all that kind of stuff there. There's some fundamental mental models that are encoded in the tools that you use. So even if an organization wanted to kind of move towards a more team-centric and more collaborative way of thinking about people's value, then the tools kind of force it back down into the individual kind of way of working. There are some new tools coming out now, a new breed of tools. I don't know what the name of the tool is. There are some specific names I'm aware of. There's actually one that's developed in Australia. There's one that's developed in Iceland, very different parts of the world. It's almost like an organizational operating system tool, which is looking at teams and looking at how the relationships happen between teams and looking at networks of value. And it's super exciting to see this thing come out. But we don't even know what we don't even know what the type of tool is called yet, because it's kind of brand new. And the category of tool, exactly, like it's a new thing basically. And these tools are sort of taking inspiration from things like Team Topologies and remote agility framework and approaches like this, and going, wow, what happens if we did take a different approach, like team-centric, flow inspired, value, start thinking about value and so on and so on. What happens if we worked out how to look into the organization using these kind of tools? It's really interesting to see, but it's pretty early days. But there is some hope, if you like, for a new way of for organizations having a different type of tool that is not just about individual productivity. It's about thinking about a network of value from teams, and it's really great to see it. It's pretty early days.
And I think it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Really interesting to see where those go, because I think a large reason that an organization adopts a set of tools is because it already matches their beliefs or their preconceptions. And so there are these new sets of tools that go with a different set of beliefs. And I wonder if they'll fit a particular end of the bell curve for the distribution of organizations rather than fitting the norm. And what it would take to get organizations to shift from kind of the individual focus to a more team focused or more humane focus.
One of the nice aspects about at least two of the tools that I've seen is that they can actually overlay different perspectives. So they'll use the underlying data, but they look at metadata from Slack and Teams and things like this. I mean, there's a danger in that space. It can get really creepy. Like, we're not talking about inspecting everyone's conversation. We're looking at the metadata, like the number of times that people communicate in a given tool and that kind of thing, and bringing that together and then overlaying a particular perspective. So it might be the remote agility framework perspective, or it might be the Team Topologies perspective, or a different kind of perspective on top of it, and going, what does this tell you? And it gives the organization options to think about things in different ways, which is great. Like, that is a much better way to do it, rather than just baking in a particular set of assumptions from the very beginning, and that's all you get.
One of my theories about the causes, if we keep working backwards from here, is a very human aspect, certainty bias. And so one pattern that you see a lot in enterprise in particular is copying answers from elsewhere. So there's a lack of confidence that there's the competence inside the organization to make decisions about how it's organized or what policies to put in. So it will instead hire that from the outside, and normally from other companies that has attributes or traits that they're looking for. So they're doing that because they feel like that's a more certain path to a result. Unfortunately, it ignores their own context and all the things they can't see about the organizations that they're copying from. So
that's something that I think both Deming and Goldratt used to talk about, is when you work in a particular way as a successful organization behaving in the ways that you want, you don't have to hide that from other organizations. Like, if you're worried about competition, you don't have to, like, there's absolutely no reason to hide it. You can share that as widely as you want, and no one else can replicate it, because they will adopt the superficial behaviors and they'll adopt the practices, but they won't adopt any of the thinking that went into getting you to a place where this thing that you do and you talk about actually works. And so I think that's a reflection of what you're talking about, which is, as someone on the other side looking for a model for success, going out and copying other companies who are successful or do things in a way that you want, in many ways almost like practically guarantees your failure. Because unless you have the exact same context that they have, the things that they do aren't going to work for you, not the way they're written. And so there's this translation between those two habits. And there's also, think about what are the things that we do, what are the things that matter to us, what's our context, and then how can we apply the ideas that those organizations work through and come to a place that works just as well for us as their practices do for them.
There's a great example of
the
that.
questions, not the answers.
Yeah, but even like try and get underneath the surface and look at the actual mindset and fundamental beliefs there. So there's a great example with AWS, Amazon Web Services, and there's a book called Working Backwards, written by, I think, former like product or VP level people at AWS, maybe even higher, I'm not sure. And they go through like the successful growth of Amazon Web Services over 20 years, and we did this and we did that, and here's an example of a template, and here's an example of a meeting format. It all looks great, but you can't just copy that. It looks like they're giving away all the secrets, but it's actually not true at all, because the fundamental beliefs inside AWS in particular are things like any service that we build, any software service that we build, must be capable of being what they call externalizable. Like, we ought to be able to turn it outwards and offer it as a commercial offering to the public. And that's true for even for like what looks like a completely internal service for taking data from here and moving it over there and blah blah. It's written in a way which is externalizable, and that's like a fundamental operating principle for the entire organization, which is part of their success. But like, it'll mention it in a throwaway comment, perhaps in the book, I can't remember. But that is the key in that particular case. That there's something there which is so fundamental, where people go, well, of course you want to. Why would you want to do it any other way? And it's so fundamental to the success of some kind of organization like that. And there's other examples which are more general. One of which is investment in learning and sharing across the organization. In particular, like running internal conferences as a way of kind of crowdsourcing good practice, sharing it, getting people like fired up and excited about things. And particularly if that kind of conference is not inward facing. So you can run a conference that could be all about engineering and technical stuff and blah, blah, which is kind of cool. Like it's good to nerd out on these things. Like it's all great, but there's a way to run those events which is kind of facing out of technology into the rest of the organization. And then you get something magical happening. So I was involved in running an internal conference at an organization I worked at over 10 years ago in London. And we ran when I was there, we ran maybe 5 or 6, I think, about every 6 months. And, we went to find people doing cool things and help them to pull together slides and things like this. And it fired people up. People felt they were valued, and we helped them to feel valued, because we would coach them on how to pull together a useful set of slides and then present it and this kind of thing. And at the first event, we had people clapping and cheering and whooping at the talk that the database administrators were giving on the new Oracle database. Like, that doesn't sound like an exciting talk, but it was amazing to see it. Like the CEO and the CTO, they were clapping and cheering because of the way that it was done, and we'd given them the confidence, or we'd helped them to kind of work through it. We'd set the context so that they could feel proud of what they're doing, and feel like that they could share that in a way which is really valuable to other people. And the value of that kind of culture, where time and effort is invested in that kind of community-based sharing, is so valuable, and yet loads of organizations don't do anything like it. like I think it was a CTO or the CEO at the time, after we'd run a few of these, after we run, say, 5 of them, he said something like, these series of events have been the single most important thing in bringing together business and technology inside the organization. And yet it was like a ground up kind of on a semi-unofficial thing that we kind of sort of felt like it was the right thing to do. And it proved like it was massively valuable. If you think about it, the cost of misalignment is so huge. But the value of therefore bringing that kind of alignment, that community thing, helping people to feel valued, people learning things really quickly, those friendships and connections made at an event like that then spread across the next 6 months and this kind of thing, hugely valuable in terms of like all kind of dimensions of how the organization operates. And yet loads of organizations don't do anything like that. So things like that can act as like secret sauce to make an organization more humane, because you've broken down some kind of barriers, you've made things, you've broken some formality down and that kind of thing. So looking for opportunities to do that kind of person-to-person connection is so valuable.
And I imagine for the organization arriving at that, whether it was intuitive or an explicit goal, was thinking about how might we help people feel proud about the work that they're doing, or how could we build some empathy between some of the business teams and the technical teams, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we've talked a bit in the macro. Let's sort of bring it in more to what does this feel like for individuals? So what are the symptoms that people might experience when they're in a inhumane work environment? Noah, do you want to start?
So it's a hard question, I think, to answer, because we don't always know that we're in an environment like that to start with. And so we can be in a position where we think everything works in a particular way and just not be aware of the surrounding context, or not be aware of things that are coming down the line that are going to change for us. But a lot of the time, what we can recognize is that organizations encourage us to behave in particular ways. That's essentially the effect of the system, right? It says that this set of behaviors is acceptable and this set of behaviors isn't. And then bigger than the organizations, there's kind of the collective beliefs that society has about how people will behave at work, kind of professionalism and, conforming to a particular set of beliefs. And when those beliefs don't match the way that we want to behave or the things that we believe about ourselves, it creates a conflict. And that's when that can start to show up. And one of those ways that it shows up is in imposter syndrome. And so we end up highly successful when we conform to a set of behaviors and expectations from our company or from society, but those don't match the way we think about ourselves. And so it almost feels like the success belongs to somebody else. And so we can't internalize it. We can't give credence to it. We can't really accept it because it doesn't feel like ours. It doesn't feel like we earned it.
And the problem with, well, there's many problems with that, but one particular problem with that disconnect between how we actually want to behave and how we kind of forced to behave. The bigger the disconnect between that, then the greater the problematic like responses to situations we're going to face. I mean, I can speak from direct experience, and I won't go into details, but like for many years, I was really operating in a way which, like, I felt like I had to work in a particular way, like running a business, like you feel you've got to work in a particular way, basically. It came to a bit of a crunch for me in a couple of years ago, when all kind of stuff happened, and it was due in large part to like feeling like I had to behave in a particular way, when actually my, if you like, personality and the way that I need to operate, if you like, personally, is quite different. And so then that behavior was coming out in negative ways with like colleagues and other people, friends and family and so on. And if you multiply that across the entire organization, if you've got like tens or hundreds or thousands of people who are basically in conflict with, if you like, their natural self, you're going to get all sorts of like really unhealthy behavior happening all the time.
You get
microaggressions and macroaggressions and all kind of stuff.
Mega aggressions,
which then contribute to that inhumane environment.
Yeah,
I describe it as friction. Like there's this feeling of friction, and it's like some things in the workplace need to be hard because they are hard problems, but some things that should be easy are hard, and that's often a key signal of when things are going wrong. It's like the things that should be easy are really hard, and you can see how that wears down on people over time. You know, they're coming home from work and they're feeling unhappy and exhausted and, you know, glad to have left early and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, friction is the way it sort of crystallizes in my mind.
And we get burnout, and we get kind of the famous, I don't know actually how famous it is, but I've been seeing it a lot recently, quote about kind of your organization's culture, in that your organization's culture is the way your employees feel on Sunday night about going to work on Monday morning.
Yeah.
Like if you know that conversation to get some alignment with another team on Monday morning is going to be unnecessarily hard, then you may not want to go into the office the next day. And yet the reason it's hard may be just there's a lack of clarity about what these teams have in common, or, you know, there's no clarity on what their services they offer is, or, you know, what the priorities of the business are. There's all these reasons that are unaddressed and could be attended to.
There's one extra dimension that we brought to the surface in the Team Topologies book, which is what we ended up calling team cognitive load. So cognitive load typically is about, normally originally applied at the individual level. It comes into play when we're learning. So we've got a limited amount of working memory. So when we're learning something new, there's various factors that affect the extent to which we can learn something, and so on and so on. And we applied that to a team. Now, it turns out the healthcare industry, round about the same time as we were writing the book, so 2018, the healthcare industry, certainly in the UK and the US, was also thinking about team cognitive load. There's searches you can do to find it exactly this, so kind of in parallel. And you think about it, you've got a team, they're building and running a service, it's their responsibility. If the size and complexity of that service is too big, then that team realistically is not going to be able to look after that service properly. So therefore they're thinking, oh God, like it's going to go down, or there's going to be a security hole because we haven't been able to understand it properly, and so on and so on. And that's going to increase the stress. It's just not realistic. They don't feel like they can, properly. I don't like the word master, but we've got autonomy, mastery, and purpose from Dan Pink. So like, we don't feel like they can master that thing properly. It's way too big. So like, it feels to me like excessive cognitive load, in terms of what we're asking teams to look after, also contributes. That's another symptom, effectively. Like it's going to contribute to that effectively inhumane working environment. If that's been ignored, then it's going to be a contributing factor.
Yeah, you've just described. So my other half is a doctor in an emergency department. You've just described kind of the baseline emotional state of every emergency room employee that I think I've met in the last 10 or 12 years. Like, it's just, the systems are overwhelmed. Too much is expected of them. The rest of the hospitals don't kind of the rest of the hospital doesn't behave in a way that allows the emergency department to function well, because you can't get people out the other end. And so there are all these compounding issues that then create baseline stress for anybody that works in that particular industry. And it's just part of coming to work in the morning for all of them.
I mean, there's a sense in which there's a bit of adrenaline involved, and some people might like a little bit of that. But like, there's a limit, right? There's a bit of a balance. If we're working there at a level where cognitive load is just way too high all the time, and we can't possibly actually learn things properly and look after something properly, whether it's a sick patient or whether it's a sick piece of software, if you like a service which needs to be updated and looked after better, then there's a real danger that contributes to an inhumane work environment. So it's having a negative effect on the human beings, effectively.
Yeah.
So I think we've wandered into our next question. So I'll just put it out there explicitly, which is why is a more humane working environment particularly important for CTOs to be concerned with? And so I think we were describing some of the engineering specific examples. I mean, we called it out at the start. The fact that it is knowledge work is a key element. So it turns out that humane working environments and knowledge work are particularly compatible. Do you want to expand on that, Noah?
Yeah, so there's this, we talked, actually, Matthew, you were just talking about cognitive load, right? And the essentially cognitive load is the amount of weight that's being put on people mentally in order to do the work they need to do. And everyone, team and individual, has a limited cognitive capacity, right? And so that's the amount of work that we're capable of doing. And so the larger the load that's put on people for kind of these inhumane practices, this stress, unnecessary conflict, kind of poorly shaped work or poorly shaped organizations or behavioral expectations, whatever the cause, the less energy and mental capacity that people then have to do the thoughtful, creative, disciplined work that they need to do in order to be successful. And so as a CTO, one of the things that really matters is, how can I reduce the unnecessary load on people so that they can do the best work and we can get the greatest value for what we're doing, and we can end up with the best results and the best code that we're capable of creating. And as that load increases, best drops, right? And so the quality of what ends up happening and the value of what ends up happening decreases.
Yeah. When you've witnessed environments where there's like high dependencies on the CTO and low decision velocity, the degree of stress that can put on teams is really, really high. So because they now, even if they could, drink from the fire hose and deal with lots of information, they are now in a situation where they have no idea how they can make progress. And successive attempts at trying to get a decision out of the CTO are failing, and then they're like starting to throw their hands up and look for their next job opportunity. So yeah, Matthew, do you have some examples?
Excuse me. So I think ultimately part of this is around excuse me, a couple of things. One, if people are not, if people are feeling kind of disempowered and feeling, if the work environment is inhumane, they're not going to be, they're not going to be bringing kind of new perspectives. They're not going to be willing to take risks or offer interesting different perspectives. Bear with me. So in terms of like kind of innovation velocity, innovation speed, then that's going to drop right down. That ends up in a vicious cycle, because then we get a situation where the organization is not moving as quickly as the business expects. And then they pile on more pressure saying, deliver this faster, we need to get these features out the door quicker, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Then we've got a horrible vicious cycle there. So it's hugely important to set things up in a way where people are able to have that spark, and that spark is extinguished by conditions which are inhumane. I distinctly remember in two separate companies, one I worked for and one I consulted for. There's one team in each which was super high performing, very much more high performing than the other teams around them. And yet, if you looked at them, it looked like that particular team was just messing about. They had like Nerf guns and water, like this kind of stuff, and then they're doing all kind of stuff. And yet, the reason why they were high performing is because they built trust. They had a sense of like a humane working environment inside their kind of area, and they worked out how to work really well together. But it looked like they were wasting loads of time. But in each organization knew that they were high performing, and so they weren't going to clamp down on this kind of like apparently like tomfoolery, like messing about behavior, because that was just an expression of that team working really, really well. And so allowing at a greater scale, allowing organizations and people and teams in organizations, allowing them the kind of space to be thoughtful and creative, and bring more of themselves to the organization. It's not just about get this thing out the door or deliver this feature or do this thing that I'm telling you to do. Like, people certainly inside knowledge work don't want to. They don't want to be. Most people don't want to be in that context. They want to be able to be creative and work with the people in interesting ways and that kind of thing. So setting up the conditions, the CTO can set up the conditions at least inside kind of the engineering or IT space for that kind of creativity and connection with other people to happen.
I want to pull together a couple of different things, because actually it's the question about why it's important for CTOs, I think is great, because I've worked with, and some examples. So I've worked with a handful of organizations in the last kind of 5 to 10 years. And one of the, as a consultant, brought in to help them improve the ways that they work and improve the organization so that they can essentially achieve more and deliver more value. And one of the things that's consistent between most of them is an organizational focus on speed of delivery. And I don't know how much you guys have experienced this, but when a CTO goes to a development team, a product development team, or a software or delivery team, or however you have it structured, and says to them, we need to be faster, we need to deliver faster, we need to get more out the door, there are a few things that happen. First, stress levels immediately go up. But second, one of the things that happens most frequently is quality decreases, right? People often start cutting corners. They often start taking shortcuts. They aren't as thorough as they would be. And this has a really negative impact, because most people, not all people, but most people take pride in the work that they do. They want to do a good job. And when their leadership comes to them and says, this job that you're doing needs to be done faster, and they then have to compromise what they think doing a good job is, that's hard on them. Like, that affects their ability to do good work. It affects them directly because they don't do work that's as good, but also it affects their cognitive load and their capacity to then do the best work that they can do. And so I've seen it in a 3-person startup I worked 4 years ago. I've seen it in large banks that I've worked with in the UK and New Zealand. I've seen it in insurance companies and startups. But as soon as, like, as a CTO, if your focus shifts towards speed and how fast you get things out the door, there's a whole bunch of unintended consequences that come along with that I think most people are probably unaware of.
I think it's a good point. I think there's a nuance to that as well, which is like, if it's a sense of we need to push things out of the door more quickly, then absolutely. But clearly there's some stuff that CTOs can do, which is to rethink how work happens, to rethink things like team boundaries, to rethink about how we clump together or not clump together the work from different teams. Like, do we bring it all together in one big block, or do we actually allow that stuff to flow independently? There's things that the CTO can do to enable much more humane ways of working inside the organization. And then the result of that is that we get value faster. But expecting to push more things through, and that's the only focus, like number of features in a month, make sure it goes up. Like that fundamentally misunderstands the nature of what a software service is for a start, and the nature of what software development is, which is about understanding the business context and then representing that in code rather than just like pushing out features. Anyway, but finding ways to enable flow and then let teams get on with it, looking for things that are blocking flow, spending time on that stuff rather than saying increase the number of features you're getting out the door in a month. It's the focus, like you said, the focus on like increasing feature velocity leads to like a decrease in code base health, a decrease in the health of the people and teams around it, and that's just another vicious cycle, because then it's hard to get out of that pit or trough of poor health of the ecosystem, effectively the software ecosystem.
Yeah, so you want to
with your example earlier. With your example earlier, Matthew, with the high-performing team that had a lot of character that you were describing, I've certainly seen organizations in the desire for consistency to actually stamp out some of those, high-performing character teams. And it's an interesting dichotomy where the organizations that they aspire to copy from, the ones that are moving more nimbly and competing better in the market, often when you dig into how the change came about, it was from where things were being done differently within the organization, and that almost caught like a fire that that spread and became part of the culture of the organization. And yet the companies that are chasing are instead sort of copying and looking to import some sort of facsimile of that as their pathway to get there, and wonder why that is not that path doesn't actually lead to the same results.
Definitely. But ultimately, the organizations with the success almost certainly are those with a really healthy attitude towards humans. Like they actually care about the connection between different people. They care about the experience of what it's like to work there. They're actually listening to people's experience and that kind of thing. And something results off the back of it. But then the organizations that are looking to copy almost certainly are not looking to really deeply care about human beings, because they're looking for a quick fix. And human, like an ecosystem or a real organization with multiple connections and things, that takes time to nurture and develop. Can't just import it. Maybe sometimes it works, but like I would say most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah, you have payoffs on different timescales, and not everything is going to give you a short-term payoff. It comes back to that sort of certainty bias. All right, so that brings us to our final question, and then also towards our wrap-up. So how might a CTO assess the most important issues affecting the quality of the working environment and determine what to improve next?
A cheeky answer is look for the number of Nerf guns and the number of Nerf bullets fired. The problem with that, of course, so then those kind of those foam bullets that you get fired from these guns. The problem with that, of course, is you can't just get Nerf guns, buy a load of Nerf guns and bring them in the building and expect that to generate the culture that you want. Like the Nerf guns are a symptom of a really good trusting environment inside a team. So you've got to be very careful what you actually measure on these kind of approaches. You can't just use some kind of employee pulse survey, because people might feel like they have to respond in a positive way to be seen as someone who's really cheerful and excited about stuff. So this is why we need people with arts and humanities experience inside technology, because then we understand some of the dangers in this kind of space. There are some things you can do clearly. But the way to assess that stuff, I think, in my experience, needs to somehow feel empowering to the people who are being assessed, or to the people involved in that kind of assessment. If it's made clear that that assessment is somehow about listening to them and helping them to somehow control or influence their working life more, then you'll get buy-in. That's certainly my experience. I've done this at scale in a few different organizations now. And once people realize, you're not going to compare us with that other team, you're not going to compare us with this or stack rank us or something. It's about actually empowering us. Okay, yeah, I'll get involved. But again, it's that thing where looking in from the outside, we did this kind of assessment across 70 teams. Okay, we'll just do that thing. Okay, we'll assess them and then we're going to compare them and hide all the results. And then, no, don't do that. Like, start with the intention of empowering people and understanding where they're coming from and all the rest of it. Then you'll start to see some good results.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important. There's so the key there is, the first one is ask people, right? So many companies have a tendency to try to silence the critics and the people who are complaining, but the people who are silent aren't necessarily the people who are happy. They're often the people who are already too run down to care. The people who are complaining are the people who still have the energy and the focus to care, and they're telling you what's hurting at the moment. So listen. So that's one side. The other thing is, I've found this to be a really helpful question. If you think about your organization and you think about how it operates, and then you sit down and ask yourself, how would I behave in this situation if I had complete trust in my team to do the right thing? And see what you come up with, and then look at how that's different from the way that you actually behave. And you can replicate that across all areas of the organization. Like, how would I do product if I trusted my team to understand security and understand scaling and understand performance and understand what good looks like and what we needed from them? Well, it probably wouldn't involve 16 quality gates, right? It would look very different. And so if you start with that basic question, you can work out a lot of the places where people are feeling pain and why just from there. And then figuring out which things to fix first is another exercise, but it does give you a really good place to start when you're trying to understand where the problems lie.
Yeah, I 100% agree. The listening part also, to build on what Matthew was saying, they need to have belief that you'll actually follow through. And so one thing to combine with that is, rather than going broad and going, all right, we're going to change things for all 70 teams at once, it's like, also you can look at opportunities to go deeper first. Like, can we help a single team, and can we expand out from there and build from that success? And again, that's another common example where you see from the companies that successfully change compared to a lot of enterprises where they go, all right, we've got 70 teams. All right, let's do this for 70 teams. And it's that peanut butter effect.
And crucially, in that particular case there, if you're working with one particular team, then success is when team members from that team willingly want to share their experience about what's happened. Mm-hmm. Warts and all, good and some bad bits too. That's when it's compelling. Mm-hmm. But if no one from that team actually is interested in sharing that stuff with anyone else, then it's been imposed. It's not been empowering. It's probably heading towards something that's less humane. So there's ways of doing that stuff as well, where we'd expect to see certain signals, whether we're on the right track.
There's also, I think, a caveat that goes with it, which is improvement, in order to be sustainable, needs to be systemic in nature. And when you focus on a single team, that team as part of the system is likely to improve. And in fact, you can make things great for them. But one of the side effects that often happens is more pain for the teams that surround them. And if your goal is long-term improvement for the entire organization, then just recognize that increased pain for other people is likely while you figure things out. It's not a negative that it happens. It's kind of an inevitable thing as part of kind of going deep first and isolating a change and improving things in a small area. But if your intent is then to expand it to other areas, then that increased pain on a temporary basis can be quite acceptable.
Well, that is about all we have time for. So before we close out, Noah, where can we find you?
So you can find me at noahcantor.com. I am currently giving away a free ebook about imposter syndrome. So we discussed it today. If you are suffering from being in an organization where you are not able to be the person that you'd like to be and you're struggling, then by all means, come download the ebook. It's called Conquering Imposter Syndrome. It'll help you recognize the distinction between what it is the company is trying to encourage from you and what you want to bring to the table and how you want to behave.
Excellent. And Matthew,
You can
where can people find you?
MatthewSkelton.com. And we've got a few initiatives on at the moment, one of which is actually quite exciting. We're bootstrapping a fast flow community to bring people together, talk about stuff, share ideas, learn, and we'll see what else happens. We're all pretty excited about that. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, just get in touch with me, follow the links via MatthewSkelton.com, and maybe give you early access, that kind of thing.
Right, that sounds awesome to get involved with. And as usual, people can find me over at my strangely named Substack. So recently I've been writing about software estimation and how it's mostly waste. Our next episode on July 17th, that is 7 p.m. New Zealand time, 8 a.m. British Standard Time, and our special guest for that episode is Adelina Chalmers. Excellent. All right. Well, I might leave you with this thought. A healthy environment, I think it is apt to think about it a bit like a garden. You know, it takes cultivation and working on the environment that will help things grow. So until next time, have a great one.